pained me to realize this, because that means that while they were, negotiating in good faith, supposedly, with the West Moberly and Saulteaux First Nations, they were also rapidly approving cut blocks in the critical habitat of southern mountain caribou.
This is Defender Radio. I'm Michael Howie, and this is Defender Radio, the podcast for wildlife advocates and animal lovers, brought to you by the Fur Bearers. Before we start talking about this week's episode, I want to thank all of you for the wonderful support and response to the announcement I made last week about the new Young Defenders initiative. I'm working hard on the finishing touches to the back end of the website at youngdefenders.ca, and I'm developing a whole bunch of original content. The podcast itself will take a few weeks yet as the final pieces come together, but the site, articles, community, and social media will all be fully active next week. That's the first week of June. Please head over to youngdefenders.ca to sign up for alerts about the new site and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by searching for Young Defenders and clicking on the shield logo. For all the patrons of Defender Radio and Young Defenders, I also want to let you know that we'll be launching a Discord server soon, an online chat room you can access from your desktop or mobile device where you can trade arts and crafts ideas, DIY solutions to wildlife coexistence in your community. You can discuss school projects or news items, and generally just have some fun with like-minded people. Get details on the Patreon at patreon.com/defenderradio or follow the links on this week's show notes. Now, let's talk about this week's interview. Mountain caribou are endangered in British Columbia. It's a big deal. The federal government has threatened to intervene if plans aren't put in place to protect them. So there's a few regions at play, and one of the plans for one of the regions, worked on heavily by First Nations leaders, is receiving praise. But the plan for at least one other region has huge holes in it and fails to address some key issues. Now, while protecting caribou habitat may seem like a straightforward task, both the previous BC provincial government, run in a majority by the Liberals, and the current government, run by an NDP-Green partnership, is showing that it's anything but straightforward. From literally, and I mean literally, selling the rights to cut down trees in the habitats of the endangered caribou while negotiating for the endangered caribou, to killing wolves despite widespread scientific and ethical opposition, to a disturbing rise in racism and economic disinformation, it's been a confusing journey. As the consultation period winds down, and links to actions on that are included in this week's show notes because you only have until May 31st to get your comments in, I did want to take some time to break out the points, challenge the myths, and hear opposing opinions to what industry and politicians have spouted. That's why I connected with Charlotte Dawe, Conservation and Campaign Manager for Wilderness Committee, who patiently listened to my tangents and walked me through the last year of work on this campaign and how you can be part of the solution. Let's start with what the issue is in extraordinarily broad strokes.
Okay.
We've got caribou, we've got wolves, we've got forestry and gas, we've got politicians, we've got the public, we've got lobby groups, and everyone is at the beginning of the story sort of drawing their own lines in the sand. So let's start with the general broad stroke overview. What are we talking about today?
We're going to be talking about the issue of southern mountain caribou and their decline and their how they're headed for extinction, why they're headed for extinction, like what's caused them to have such drastic declines in not a lot of time, and what needs to be done, and the resistance to getting that done, I feel like, are some of the main points.
Yeah, and I think resistance might be even a bit of a mild word in some regards. To those of us who have been following that. But so you did send me a very lovely chronology via news articles that I could go over and refresh myself on all of this. So let's start. The first one on the list is from earlier this year, beginning of April, at the beginning of engagement sessions. So I'm going to also recommend anyone who's interested in the deep dive science on this. I interviewed Dr. Gilbert Proulx, last year, I think. I'll put the link to that episode in the show notes. But we went into the science of the penning plan, of the wolf killing plan, and really, and Gilbert is he's a hardcore biologist, sciencey guy, and he just kind of went off for 40 minutes on it, which was great. But for those who want that deep dive into the very specific beginning of the issue, that's a good place to start. But we're going to start with the conflict, so to speak. So the engagement sessions for everyone to get together, all the parties, and I think this included the federal government at this point. Everyone got together to more or less talk about this and pitch ideas, answer questions, look at the agreements that were in place, or the draft agreements they wanted to put in place. How did that go?
It started with engagement sessions, and this is sort of before the public was briefed on the topic, although the BC government has they've released consultations in the past before. Like, none of this is new. None of the strategies that were mentioned in these new agreements were like, it's not like they were pulled out of thin air and never talked about in the area. There was actually a conservation agreement consultation that happened in, I believe it was 2017 and 2018, about southern mountain caribou and how to save them, and there was a time for people to write in and everything. So this has been ongoing for a long time, but now all of a sudden, because these agreements are directly affecting some of these, or involve the forests where some of these towns are, this was the first time a lot of the public heard about this. So as they started, from what it seemed like to me, it was just gathering information, which quickly turned into a storm of misinformation, fear mongering, panic, like you name it. The communities that are near the central group of southern mountain caribou were up in arms completely over these agreements.
And there were, how do we differentiate between them? Is it just geographic based?
Yes. So basically, southern mountain caribou, you have 3 different groups of southern mountain caribou. You have the northern group, the central group, and the southern group. And the partnership agreement, which is what we're talking about today, has to do with the central group of southern mountain caribou. And it's in the traditional, so the central group of caribou reside in the traditional land of the West Moberly and Saulteaux First Nations. And a lot of other communities live up there as well. So this plan is just focusing on that group of caribou.
All right. And I remember talking with you and a couple of other folks about this when it came out. And the reason I'm going to put in, the reason I'm also very, very glad for this overview that you sent me and this conversation we're having is this took place almost at the same time as the big provincial move in Alberta to protect a swatch of land, as I recall, which was very, very contentious in the foothills somewhere.
Right.
So there was literally meetings happening at the same time in BC, in Alberta, having to do with the environment and wildlife. And for someone from Ontario, got conflated easily. So when we look at these plans, we're looking, so this is, there was 219 caribou in 6 herds in the region. And it just seems like we got to move fast. I mean, that's the reaction I get from it, that this is not good. Let's go in quick and let's go in hard. And as I mentioned before, there's already science on this.
Yeah.
We know exactly what is happening. Which is, I'll let you maybe get into that a bit.
Yeah,
that would make sense for an interview format, wouldn't it?
Okay, maybe, sure. You probably know it as well as I do. So essentially, caribou, what's happening with caribou, the main ultimate cause is habitat destruction. Habitat destruction leads to a couple of things. First is it directly removes their food, which is lichen. So some groups of southern mountain caribou rely on lichen that grows from old growth trees, which can take up to 150 years for the lichen or for the tree to grow to an age that can support this particular type of lichen. So when you directly remove that old growth tree, you remove the food source that can't come back in that area for another 150 plus years. That's one of the issues that doesn't really get talked about enough. And also you remove the shelter, like for the caribou, so it's easier access, can hunt them more easily. And then that leads to the second issue, which is when you have habitat destruction, not only are you directly removing that forest right there, but you're building a bunch of roads in to remove that forest. And those roads, we like to call, the sciencey term for it is a linear feature. Basically any pathway that cuts through a forest leading into what would have been not accessible backcountry. So basically, if you think of a mountain and think about the snowpack on top, then think about a wolf, which is caribou right now. It's one of like the main predators to caribou. A wolf isn't going to access that backcountry, that high elevation, because the snowpack is just too high. But if you have linear features, which are like roads or snowmobile trails, which pack down the snow and create this highway into backcountry, all of a sudden wolves are getting into these areas they can't, and they're easily picking off caribou, which is what's happened. That's why caribou are declining. So do the wolves have a part to play? Yes, of course. Is the solution to kill all the wolves and then be done with it? No, because they still need food in the forest. They still need that habitat for food, and they still need shelter. So the way to fix it is habitat protection, number one, and then habitat restoration, which means blocking the linear features, roads and whatnot, that wolves are accessing. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
It does. And I think we've had this exact conversation both for a past episode when we talked about some of these plans and just chatting about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so the partnership agreement, which was created by West Moberly and Saulteaux First Nations in collaboration with the federal and provincial government, the partnership agreement really addressed all of the threats and took a number of measures to recover caribou. Usually when you see a plan or a recovery effort into caribou, it's just killing wolves. Like it's just ticking one box. And so this plan is really amazing because it protects quite a bit of critical habitat, which is the first we've seen. It puts effort into restoration. It has a maternity pen. So you're seeing a number of different recovery measures. And that's what makes this plan actually have some potential. And that's why we're actually excited about this.
Yeah, it's one of the first times that the other stuff is being acknowledged by governments.
Yeah.
Going back, and again, Alberta and BC have both been struggling with this issue for years. And that's why the federal government got involved, because they hadn't done anything. And it's very positive. And a lot of folks are very excited about that one plan. But it has meant that looking at the other ones, there's not a lot there. And, again, going through the articles and the comments, a lot of it's saying it doesn't answer questions. It doesn't show us the way forward. And I think something that's very, very telling as well, I'm going over an article from CBC by Betsy Trumpeter and Andrew Kurjata, I believe, 500 dead wolves versus 500 lost jobs. So this is a great one for a lot of reasons, because there's elements of this article I love. They did talk to all the different sides, which is important in journalism. It found this one town is the perfect microcosm for this conversation too. But one of the things, third paragraph in, first sentence, the wolf calls are effective. And I ask who said that?
Right.
That's just me being the former journalist getting a little, bratty about the fact that you have just made a scientific declaration without any evidence, without any source, and it's wrong. So,
and it's also a sweeping generalization. Like the wolf calls are effective in the short term, effective in the long term, effective at reducing the number of wolves, effective at fewer caribou being killed. Like it's a sweeping generalization, because the thing about the wolf call is if you if you rely on killing predators, so in this case, wolves, you can't just only kill wolves. You'd have to kill the bears and the cougars, which in some cases and in some areas eat more caribou than wolves.
Mhm.
So if you're doing a predator cull, you'll need to kill all the predators. And then a predator cull, you can't just do 1 year and then see the caribou rebound. You have to do it basically, I think it's 90 years
Wow.
before you have a like population level impact in and where the caribou can recover enough to be self-sustaining. And so the whole thing about recovery is to achieve self-sustaining populations. So managing our wilderness and shooting things that we feel are pests is not creating, that's not nature supporting itself. I mean, there was a study that came out that said, yeah, wolf culls and maternity penning are effective in recovering caribou. Well, yeah, I mean, if you put a fence around something and then remove all of its predators, sure, you're probably going to increase the chance of that species survive, but that sounds a lot like a zoo.
But
That does not.
in
Yeah.
that one too, they're not even just removing predators, they're removing all competition
Yeah.
for the caribou. So anything that would use their habitat, anything that would also eat that lichen they like, everything gets killed. And you're absolutely, it's not sustainable. It's not realistic.
No.
Especially when we know what the real problem is.
Yes.
Which brings us back to this one. And this, I don't know the answer to this. So for those who are not reading along with me right now, because, that's not how reality works. I read something, you don't automatically know what I'm reading. I feel like I'm going off on a tangent. Anyway, the situation is there's two mills, I suppose, in this town of not a whole lot of people. I'm looking for the name of the town. Chetwynd?
Chetwynd, yeah.
Northeast of Prince George. And they're saying if you shut down this mill, which could be a reality, because if you have to protect the habitat, then the mills aren't going to be working. It's going to destroy the town. And that's a reasonable fear. If 500 people are going to lose their jobs in a small industry town, that economy cannot support that kind of a loss.
Right.
So how do we balance that? I think that's a fair question to ask. And it feels like I've not heard from anyone in government about how they're going to mitigate that.
Right. So here's a little bit of context. The partnership agreement would protect 300,000 cubic meters. So that would be off limits in the harvest area. So there's 3 different areas that you can harvest from within the central group, within where the plan is impacting. And so 300,000 cubic meters throughout those 3 areas would be off limits. Compare that with the total harvest area, which is 7.9 million cubic meters.
That's a lot of cubic meters.
Yeah. So that's literally 3.7% of the total volume of cubic meters that would be off limits. So if an industry can collapse from protecting 3.7% or reducing their harvest by 3.7%, that means there's something else going on if they have to automatically shut down a mill. And this 500 jobs, this came from a guy named Roger Roy who works in the Chetwynd mill. He's the general manager. We don't know where he got. So he is claiming that he got this number from government, from provincial government.
Yeah.
No one in the provincial government has said anything like this. From when I've talked to them, I said, hey, you guys, someone is saying that you're claiming 500 jobs will be lost. No one has said that. So this is what I'm talking about, the fear mongering and whatnot. And is this mill likely to close? Maybe. I mean, all of these mills in the small towns are closing up. Like we've just seen Canfor close down a mill or temporarily is shutting down mills. West Fraser is shutting down another mill in some other area of the province. Has nothing to do with caribou. A lot of these mills are shutting down because these forestry companies are losing money from having mills in these small communities, and they're not processing logs locally to where they're harvested. So it's an industry issue because the industry is always going to protect their bottom line. The less number of people you have working and the increased automation means more money. If you can ship away your logs and process them in other places that's going to be cheaper rather than locally, you're going to do that because you're going to save more money. If you're not going to value add, you're not going to create a diverse number of products through the wood that you harvest because you make more money in pulp and paper. So they're going to do that. These industries don't work for communities. They're not set up that way. And so I think this conversation about caribou is a bigger one. It's about how do we create an industry that works within our environment and works for our communities, because the way we have it right now is we're liquidating our forests. These companies are liquidating the backyards of these small communities, and then they're making a bunch of money, and then they're leaving. Last year, forest companies in Ontario, for instance, made record number of profits, yet they employed fewer number of people and net salaries decreased. So the industry it's not working for communities, and to blame it all on caribou is just, I think they're scapegoating. If they do shut down that mill, protecting caribou habitat might have something to do with it, but I think it was inevitable.
So they had pretty much created a situation where if it fails, it's made to look as though it's a result of something else other than a large corporation saying, hey, we can save money for our shareholders if we do this.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, these companies have gone in and they exponentially are increasing the number of logs that they harvest in a forest that doesn't exponentially regenerate. And then also take into account the pine beetle that's happened here in BC. That's reduced log supply like crazy, and they knew this was happening, yet they continued to log. They're kind of running out of log supply, and that's their fault. They didn't and it's the government's fault for allowing this to happen. So to blame it solely on caribou, I mean, it's perfect timing. It's perfect timing for them to be able to walk away and say, oh, this was caribou. But I'm not convinced that it is that. In fact, there is a report from West Fraser itself that said that it's inconclusive if the partnership agreement will impact harvest rate. I can send you the details, but it's crazy. I just got this forwarded to me, and I was astounded to see this because it directly contradicts what this Roger Roy guy is running around saying.
Well, what's problematic too is you then get MLAs running around repeating it.
Exactly.
I'm looking at this next article from Glacier Media, which is a cute name for a large corporate media conglomerate. Peace River South MLA Mike Bernier said that, and this is a quote, one of the challenges oh, jeez, come on, guys. So the newspaper forgot to put an apostrophe in the word we're, and I just read it as were. So that's on them.
Right.
But hey, cut back all of the journalists, and anyway, different conversation to have.
Exactly.
But one of the challenges we're faced with right now is that our government, the NDP government, I feel like that did not need to get put in, is coming in and imposing on rural British Columbia a chance that's going to shut down. Okay, the rest of the sentence doesn't even make sense.
It's tough to read.
It is. It is poorly structured, and the journalists did not take the simple steps of repairing it.
No, but
anyway.
so they're saying that it's going to shut down the entire backcountry.
Yes, and it's going to devastate communities. Yeah. And it feels like, gee, maybe this person's, using this as a political opportunity.
Yes.
But it is something that comes up, and I know you experienced this out west. I experienced it here in Ontario. The fact that I live in Hamilton to a great number of people means I should not have any voice when it comes to anything happening in rural regions outside of Hamilton.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate the emotional connection there. I get saying, this is my home, not yours. Why are you telling me what to do? I get that. But beyond that, I don't know how people think that's how the world works. Right. Like that's just not how that's not how it goes. Everything affects everything.
Yes, exactly. And I think so I've thought about this a lot too, and I said, well, how am I able to have a say without people discrediting me because I live in Vancouver? And then this trophy hunter guy called me a while ago about about the wolf call.
Yes.
And he lived in Vancouver, and he was expressing that, we should still have a wolf call, whatever. And I thought, okay, so it seems like users who of the backcountry are allowed to have a say. Like if I hunted in Chetwynd a lot of the time, would I like? It seems like I would be able to have more of a say if I did that. It seems like only if you're directly using it do you get to have a say. And that's sort of like where a lot of the hunters will come in and say, well, you don't hunt animals, you're not in this area, so you can't talk about it. Do you want do you want everyone in the city to go up there and hunt? Like, no, that's not good. And I think also one of the best things we as humans can do for nature is to leave it alone sometimes. Yeah. And so by us city folks being here, and I mean, as smaller towns, like as there's more urban sprawl and whatnot, that has a huge impact on the environment. And so having a lot of us centered in a city, I think reduces our impact if we were to all like move out to small towns and like increase the urban sprawl.
Oh yeah.
And so I don't know, I hate that argument. And I also think it says that wildlife is yours to claim. Like if it's in your area, then that's your wildlife, and it's not. Like wildlife belongs to no one, but I think everyone in this province has a duty to look out for them and protect them, and to do what we can.
Well, I mean, the argument itself has so many logical fallacies in it, but also one of the big things, and this is something that, and I'm trying to figure out, there is one study from 2012 about outdoor recreational use in Canada. And I'm not sure if you've seen this one. I can send it to you, and I can link to it in the show notes for this episode. All of the provinces had to submit their recreation data. So who's spending what on what, and where are people going? And it's about people being out of doors. So I was specifically looking at trapping because that's our thing. And that figure worked out to something like 0.002% of outdoor users are trappers.
Okay.
But trapping legislation far exceeds regulations related to almost any other outdoor activity. But my point of that is, the anecdote aside, that the number of people going out and enjoying the outdoors who aren't consumptive users, and by consumptive users, I mean fishers, hunters, trappers, by far outweighs.
Oh, yeah.
By far those that are. It's just maybe not as visible.
Totally. And yeah, exactly. It's not as visible. And I think... I mean, there's not the powerful lobby money group behind people who like hikers.
Yeah.
You know, like I think the reason why, well, the BC Wildlife Federation gets has such a political pull is because a portion, not a very big portion of their hunting permits goes to conservation and stuff and whatnot. Well. But yeah, and it's such a, and that's the thing, is there's such a large amount of people who are just going out and doing low impact recreation, and yet when it comes to issues in the forest and like consultations, their voices are weighed less than those like big lobby groups.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a serious problem that I think needs to be addressed moving forward. Yeah. And I'd say that's true of everything, though. I mean, if an economist in Toronto has the solution to the logging issue in northeastern BC, do you want to hear it, or do you want to be proud of the fact that you don't listen to anybody? Like, I don't know. Yeah. It's very egocentric. But
and so just to jump back to the MLAs that are running around and blaming the current government, the NDP government, on shutting down the backcountry. Like it's really sad that this has turned so petty between the NDP and the Liberal governments, because they're pulling in real people's fears of their livelihood for political gain. And realistically, if the Liberal government had done anything on Caribou, literally anything, we wouldn't have been in the situation we are in today.
Yeah.
The NDP government is doing this because they were forced into a corner too. When Catherine McKenna made the imminent threat announcement, that's the first step to signal that an emergency order is sort of on the way. And an emergency order can protect all critical habitat throughout BC, which would have far more devastating impacts than protecting what they've proposed in the partnership agreement. So the NDP government was forced into this position by the federal government. And I honestly think had the Liberal government, provincial government in BC still been in power right now, there already would have been an emergency order. That's what I think, because they weren't willing to do anything. It was clear. And I think the federal government would have just given up on them and issued the emergency order. And the only thing that the Liberal government did was ask forestry companies. They'd ask them to voluntarily reduce their impact in critical habitat. And none of the forest companies volunteered, as you might imagine. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I really want to talk about, two more points of this, but one of the ones that we haven't touched on a lot, and it's something that Wilderness Committee worked hard on, and I know a couple of individuals did as well. And actually, this is an article with quotes from you in it. That this is Narwhal, May 14, 2019. BC approves 314 new cut blocks in endangered caribou habitat over last 5 months.
Yes.
So when we talk about industry being the problem, it's difficult why people don't see this as a problem.
I know.
It's, yes, we want the economy to do well. No one's saying we don't want the economy to do well. But the reality is they were approving companies to come in, add new roads, which we know is one of two parts of the problem, as well as cut down new swatches of forest, which is the second part of that problem, while negotiating the plans to protect endangered species in that habitat. Yeah. And I personally, it just makes me bleed out my ears a little bit. I can't formulate a question for you because it's so... I don't it borders on evil, like genius. Yeah. Yeah. It really, really does. And how do we deal with that? If you could just fix it for us, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, I think calling them out is the first thing. I mean, so our mapper, Jeff, who works at the Wilderness Committee, we worked together and we were the ones who figured out that 314 number. And so, that was in 5 months during negotiations with First Nations. And like you said, making your ears bleed, it pained me to realize this, because that means that while they were, negotiating in good faith, supposedly, with the West Moberly and Saulteaux First Nations, they were also rapidly approving cut blocks in the critical habitat of southern mountain caribou. And this is also what makes me so angry when industry plays the victim card is they knew that this was coming, and they got so many. They had 314 cut blocks approved in 5 months. So it's like there was like a gold rush to get these cut blocks approved, because of course once they're approved, the plan can't protect them from being cut. So, I mean, to call out the NDP government for negotiating in what I think is bad faith while they're approving cut blocks, by night, but talking about protecting them by day, that's negotiating in bad faith. And I think calling them out is part of that. But I'm hopeful that a change is coming to how we do business here. And I think there's such a difference between jobs. Okay, so there's a difference between creating jobs and then there's also a difference between, like, there's different forms of economy, like economy in the number of jobs versus economy in profits to shareholders. Yeah. Because our economy in profits to shareholders in BC has been doing great. More companies are getting richer, but our economy in terms of the number of jobs is doing poor. We're laying off people left, right, and center because of automation, because of raw log exports, because of a number of things. So it's not as simple as just economy. I think we have to look at how industry is working for us. And if they're not, then they can leave and we can create community-based forest operations that do work for us.
It's interesting because if you were to take the approach to planning, to resource allotment and all of that you see in these rural regions and apply it to an urban center, there would be riots in the street. Yeah. Because it would be taking the little bit of green space we have and saying, well, someone can make some money on it and you might get a job out of it.
Yeah.
Like if you try and think of it that
Yeah.
way, it's
Yeah.
no, that's not okay.
Well, it's the mindset of like, oh, what is it? It's such an old saying. It's like make hay while the sun shines.
Oh, we're Googling that.
What is that?
We're going on adventure, podcast audience.
There is one.
Make hay,
Oh
sun
man.
shines.
Or something.
To make hay while the sun shines. Literally, so there's two definitions. There's the literal, to make hay during favorable weather.
Right.
And idiomatic, which is to act while an opportunity exists, semicolon, to take action while a situation is favorable.
Yes, exactly. So it's like that mindset. Well, the forest is here, so we might as well log it. And it's just like, and then we'll deal with the repercussions later. It's that mindset is how industry has operated, and that's why they've run into a situation where they have no forest left to log, because they've done it this way. They knew this was coming. And now a lot of these companies are like they're opening up mills in the States now because they've liquidated all of BC's forests.
Yep. And it's not it's technically a renewable resource, but the rate at which it's being taken is not sustainable.
No, it's not. And there's little caring into where they harvest from. Like I've been speaking with someone who works in industry. They're a professional biologist, and they told me that they go into a forest to approve it to be cut, and they don't even feel qualified because they're not an ecologist. They don't know what species are there, if species are at risk, what to look for in terms of nesting habitat. Like it's just this big loophole in the system of how we're logging our backcountry and where we're doing it, and just a lack of care and a lack of planning. And that's why we're losing jobs. That's why we're losing caribou.
Yeah. Absolutely. I actually read, and I'll try and find this and link it, a summary of an article that was written by two political scientists, one liberal, one conservative, that took a look at the way we're going, just in general, regarding resource use, and saying that it worked in the 80s, but there's a reason we started moving away from it, and why other nations are investing more and more money in innovation, in technology, in all of this, whereas Canada's almost doubling down, which is an expression I don't like because it's not accurate. It's a gambling term that means something entirely different than how it's used. But anyway, doubling down, with a caveat, on resource extraction. Like to say, like, we know it's limited, we know it's harmful, and we know there's other ways to make money that are better and more sustainable. But for some reason, we're insisting on staying on this.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel the same thing. I think people think of Canada and they're like, oh yeah, it's like, it's one of the best countries in terms of like wilderness. We still have a lot of our wildlife left. But the way we're going, I don't know if that's going to be true anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
And it's such a huge, as you said, when we started talking, it's a wildly large issue that politically is being used with a very small focus. Right? It's the economy on one side, it's wolves on the other.
Yeah. And that's wrong. That's such a wrong,
And something else that's come as a result of this, and we're going to be very gentle in talking about it, is the racism that came out.
Yeah.
This was, and again, I think to the general public it might have been shocking, but to those of us who are used to these conversations, it's like, no, that's about right. And the extraordinarily underscored simplistic version is that a lot of folks online are commenting and they are pointing to First Nations peoples as the bad guy. And it's bringing out a lot of what I imagine is pre-existing racism publicly.
Yeah.
It's concerning to see.
Yeah. It's concerning to see, but it's concerning that there's been little, like, the provincial government hasn't come out in opposition to this language and to say, look, like, we're not going to be talking to you if we're going to be in a room full of people making racist comments. Like, someone needs to stand up against this. At those town halls, when racist comments are made, that needs to be shut down right away. It's not acceptable at all. And to think of it it's so disheartening and sad when I think of Chief Ken Cameron and Chief Roland Wilson, who have given their everything to save caribou. They voluntarily started the maternity pen project and increased the number of caribou. I think it's from 19 to 70 caribou. They did this all on their own. They have people out there 24/7 every day of the year watching the caribou. Like, imagine that job. And so they've put so much effort into this, and their own resources into this. And to see community members treat them like this for their initiative to protect and save an iconic provincial species, they should be like, we should all be giving them a round of applause and thanking them.
Yeah,
and it's so sad.
Yeah, I'm reading the interview. It's one of the ones I looked at earlier, and I'm looking at again now with Chief Roland Wilson from West Moberly. Am I saying that one right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. And he, I think he's a masterful politician, just based on his responses to some questions. But he's saying, like, yeah, we want to work with the industry. We want to work with backcountry users. Like, we want a plan that's going to work for everyone.
Yeah.
And you see, and again, there in this article, which I'll link, there are some comments to him that he's repeated. And it's disgusting, first of all, but then when you consider, I mean, just from that personal empathetic level, but when you consider the actual context of what they're talking about, it makes you question who these other people even are.
Yeah.
Like, if this is all they can do is talk about, if all they can do is say racist things, it's very unsettling. And as you said, I mean, at this point, the government, as much as I'm not a fan of the concept of a nanny state, needs to hand out some spankings.
Yeah.
This isn't okay.
At least shut it down, and because I feel like what they did was just give them more of a voice. Like, when they extended the consultations, I get it. Sure, if communities are upset and they want to be consulted more, extend the consultation. But a lot of the reason they extended this was for those communities who were yelling racist slurs at the town halls and online and on Facebook, harassing the First Nations. Like, sure, extend the public consultations, but denounce the racism. Say that it needs to stop. That's something that I thought should have happened long ago, and especially West Fraser, the logging company, their role in this. They're the ones who they're basically the company who ignited this fear in the communities for saying that 500 job statement, and they, whether intentionally or not, it sparked the fear that led to this situation becoming so racist, and they need to denounce it also. Like, they have to own up for their role in creating this awful landscape that's been created over caribou. Like, one of the comments I'm reading here on Facebook, this isn't so much a racist one, but this says, "How do you spell corruption?" And then it says caribou.
Yes.
What does that mean? Like, oh my God.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't even make sense sometimes. And I think part of it is people are angry and they're afraid and they're lashing out in the only way they have been taught.
Right.
And so, I mean, you have to have it's a difficult situation in which to try and have empathy. But at the very least, try and understand where they're at so it has some context.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think the government needs to take ownership of some of this.
Yeah.
They've created an acrimonious situation.
Yes. Yes, they have. And they walked into the public consultations with their head down and really nervous and said, this is, we don't want to do this, but we have to do this. We're being forced to do this. Like, they started out so apologetic that the community saw this and were like, okay, well, this is easy to push you on this because you're like, you look like you're about to fold. And so they should have been honest. They should have walked into these towns and said, look, we're going to lose caribou. This is what we need to do. Because of past management, this is where we're at. Like, they needed to walk in with some sort of spine, because they walked in just super apologetically, and frankly, they walked in as if they were terrified. And of course, it's resulted in this. So yeah, I think there's a level of understanding and consultation in terms of okay, if this mill closes, what are we going to do? what do we do in that situation? How do we ensure the town stays alive and thrives? How can we support your town that way? What are some new initiatives we can think of? That's all good, but that's not, I don't know. They've they haven't denounced a lot of the misinformation. Like
Yes.
I get people who call and say that hiking's going to be off limits and that you can no longer go camping.
Yeah.
That's wrong. Even snowmobiling and ATVing in the backcountry in this plan as it is, nothing's restricted. That's coming because it has a huge role to play, and that will likely come. But what's going to happen is if they do shut down some of the backcountry to snowmobiling and ATVing, they're going to open up areas in a place that doesn't have caribou, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it like they're willing. That's the thing about the Chief Ken Cameron and Roland Wilson, is they want to work with these communities to find a compromise. Like if the snowmobiling club is feeling like a lot of their area is off limits now, they're going to work with them and be like, okay, well, what about this area over here?
Yeah.
No caribou and this looks a little bit better. So why can't we do that? Like when we just give in to all the fear and misinformation, and when we don't, like, all of this information is online. It's all in the plan, and it's so clearly in the plan that if these people if they just read it, so many of their fears would be laid to rest.
One of the things, and I wanted to bring this up again, was the area that I was thinking about is Bighorn backcountry in
Yeah,
Alberta.
yeah,
And that argument was happening almost concurrently to a lot of
right,
this.
yeah,
So what's interesting is there's very similar crossover. So you talking
mhm,
about the backcountry like ATV or snowmobile users, the
mhm,
exact same thing came up in that argument. They're saying, well, now we're not going to be allowed to do this. That's like,
yeah,
well, maybe you won't be able to do it right here,
yeah,
but you just have to like drive 5 minutes further down the road
yeah,
to get there.
yeah.
It's
It's
I wonder
I
how much of it's a generational thing too, because I read about history from the great wars we've been in, and I say great in terms of volume, not in terms of how good they were.
mm,
But the Great War, World War II, in the U.S., you're looking at Korea, Vietnam, etc., and the amount of sacrifice the public was asked to make.
mm,
Right, like you were like I feel like we have gotten too far away from a time when you were given a ration of sugar.
yeah,
Right, like that was a reality for a
yeah,
time, and if you
yeah,
wanted to make a wedding dress, you had to find silk somewhere else
hmm,
because it was being used for military purposes.
right, exactly,
And I feel like maybe if we
exactly,
had that closer to our life, where we all have to give something up
yeah,
because it's
yeah.
for the benefit of everyone.
Well, exactly. And that's just the thing. I attended a wildlife seminar with the provincial government and different stakeholders. So it was about how basically wild ungulate populations in BC are declining. And so, you have your hunters there, you have forestry, you have oil and gas, you have like the grizzly bear viewing operations, and everyone was passing blame to the next person. Like, the hunters are like, well, forestry has cut down our area. Like there's no food for ungulates. And then forestry is passing the blame to, okay, yeah, well, we can do all this, but if oil and gas continues to operate this way, then there's no. And it's just like I stood up and I was like, okay, so we're all like, nothing is going to be solved here. If this is how, if we just keep going in circles and passing the blame, like we're going to be here in 20 years and we're going to have nothing to talk about because ungulate populations are going to be gone. And I said, look, we need to be willing to sacrifice something. Every single group here needs to be willing to sacrifice something. Like the snowmobiling group was there, and she was concerned about how her members are going to be impacted. But I mean, if your hobby is leading to the extinction of an animal, then like
Yeah.
maybe it's time you rethink how your hobby can operate within a landscape where caribou can survive.
Mm-hmm.
Like those are such easy check boxes for me. Like, just move out of caribou habitat, done. Heli skiing operations, move them out of caribou habitat, done. Like it's just,
I guess
you have to be willing to give up something. Like I don't know.
yeah, the
but
big thing is
none of them are.
it's asking the question, how can I do better? And if
Yeah.
every single person just did that little thing and tried 2%,
Mm-hmm.
what a difference that would make.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
speaking of which, let's talk next steps
Mm-hmm.
to wrap up. So
Mm-hmm.
the most recent news I have is McKenna, Environment Minister McKenna, threatening the government again,
Yeah.
more or less saying, like, you're not getting it done and you need to get it done.
Yeah.
Since then, though, has anything happened? Are we seeing progress, or are things stalling out? And following that, how do we as advocates, as supporters of wildlife and the environment, help move it forward in that most positive way?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a public consultation that's going on until the 31st of this month. So May 31st. And again, like, this is the most comprehensive and precedent-setting plan to protect and recover caribou that we've ever seen. So we're really encouraging people to fill out the survey that the BC government has made. We made it really easy. You can log on to our website. If you type into Google Wilderness Committee Hope for Caribou, you'll find the survey there. It's pretty long, but we give you pointers if you don't want to read the 43-page document that the BC government has linked. We basically summarize the different plans and say, like, what's good and what's bad, and you can put things into your own words. But if you fill out that survey, that would go such a long way, because that's how the BC government is. That's what they're considering as they move forward with the final version of this plan. At first, to answer the question about how it's going and if we think the government's going to waver on it, at first we were scared they were going to walk away, BC, altogether, because the backlash was so strong. But now things have changed as misinformation has kind of been resolved. We're seeing the story change, and we're seeing more people start to come around to the idea of it, and more local mayors and whatnot that are coming around to it as well. So that is good. I think if the BC government were to walk away completely, then Canada would issue an emergency order. So that's just not smart for anyone. That's not smart for the provincial government to make. So I think we will see a plan as a result of this, but what we need to do is make sure that it's the strongest plan we can, and we can do that by writing into the consultation, because the BC government needs to see support for the plan. That's just what it is. They need to see support for it to match the opposition that they felt for it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And other than that, because this is going to come out, I'm going to put this up a little early so we get 2 extra days.
Awesome.
Of sending people there. But once that has passed, because that'll be literally, it'll be 2 days after this goes online, what would be the next step? I know Wilderness Committee, you regularly have actions on your website. I'm actually filling out the survey right now.
Amazing.
So if there's typing sounds, that's what it is, putting in my information.
Great.
I've never seen it done this way, but I use the same survey. So I want to talk with you about that offline afterwards. Oh no, I just deleted something I wrote. It's okay.
No.
It's okay. It's okay.
That might have been the sentence that made the BC government commit to the plan. What the? Oh my God.
You are a terrible human being, and I love it. So once this section has been done, does it become a talk to your MLA, talk to your MP, make this a priority situation?
Yeah. Because the thing is, yes, the consultation is done, but I mean, they still need to see our support, and I think it's still very valuable to talk to your MLAs about caribou and say that you support this plan, because they're going to be obviously coming up with it, and so they need to know that the public's still on side, and that this is an issue, that this is a voting issue as well. So yeah, like meetings with MLAs. You can also sign up for our action alert list, which, as this story keeps going, we will be sending out emails about different opportunities and how you can take action to support the caribou plan. So definitely sign up for our action alerts on our website.
To learn more about Wilderness Committee or take action on the caribou or other issues, visit wildernesscommittee.org or look them up on social media. I want to send a big thanks to Charlotte, who's always a wonderful, compassionate, intelligent guest, and all of you for taking action to protect caribou. Of course, I also want to thank you for listening. As much as I love doing this show, it only continues because of you. Your ratings and reviews on the show on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen makes it possible for others to discover Defender Radio. Your clicks on social media profiles and comments about how adorable JJ is melt my heart. and your feedback gives me direction to keep growing in new and exciting ways. Thank you. Remember, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter at Defender Radio and on Instagram at Howie Michael. Patreon supporters, who give as little as 25 cents per episode, get exclusive content like bloopers, videos, and the occasional rant by me. I'll also be updating it to include contests, stickers and pin packages, the new Discord chat, and more. Just hit up patreon.com/Defender Radio to learn more. Until next time, I'm Michael Howie for Defender Radio and the Fur Bears, reminding you to be kind, stay informed, and stay strong.